Serious Redditors who have been kidnapped, what's your story? A few years ago I was in Prague with a couple of my friends. We were backpacking across Eastern Europe and Prague was the second stop. It had been a long train ride in from Amsterdam, so we went out to start celebrating quite early. I, in particular, probably went a little too hard too fast. By 10 PM I was quite drunk and the constant smoking amplified my feels for the day. There were also a few shots of absinthe that were taken. There is always a debate whether they make you hallucinate or not, but there is not debate that they make you crap-faced drunk. The next few parts of the night are still a blur, but somehow I left my friends and found myself walking around on the street outside the bar we had been in. Something happened. Rather, I probably did something that started an altercation of sorts with a random stranger. We were able to mesh it quite peacefully, but not after some loud noises and causing quite a scene. I decided to walk away to kind of just get away from the area in case any trouble arrived. I was walking down a quite side alley that I remember from earlier in the day led to my hotel when an unmarked white van creaked past me. Now mind you, my friends and I had idiotically just watched all 2 of the Hostel movies before we had left for Europe, so that whole kidnapping thing was still fresh in my mind. I started walking faster and faster, almost came to a running pace when I thought I was just overreacting and that the van was long gone. Less than a few seconds later, I hear brakes screeching behind me and turn to see 3 large guys running towards me and the same white van parked right behind them. They grabbed me and threw me inside the van before I even knew what was up. I was completely crap scared at this point and tried to reason with the 4 guys in the van, but they didn't speak a lick of English, or at least didn't respond to my pleas. We drove a few blocks until we came to a stoplight, and I decided that this was my last chance to make a break for it, or else I was completely fricked. I dove over one of the guys sitting next to me and straight out the van door that I somehow managed to open fairly quickly. I got maybe half a block before the guy caught up to me and tackled me. I looked around and tried to scream to any onlookers to help, but of course there was no one around to be seen. They handcuffed me in the van the rest of the way. We got to some building, very old, and the hallways we walked in looked old and dilapidated. I was still freaking out too much to think sanely or getting any real bearing of the place. They tried talking to me for a bit, but I couldn't make out the few English words they said to me, so they took me to a prison cell-esque room and started tying me down on a bed. There was blood on the headrest of this bed, and this was the moment I started realizing that something really bad was going to happen to me from that point on. They left to go do something for a few minutes, and in those few minutes it was life or death time for me. Still to this day, I look back at those few minutes and really admire myself and what I tried to do. You always think that when you are in a life or death situation, you will fight to survive any which way you can, but you don't really know until you are actually in one. I started trying to take off the straps immediately. There were 2 on my wrists and 2 around my ankles. I kicked and wiggled and did everything that was humanly possible to get out of those leather shackles. I was able to get off the 2 feet shackles within a few minutes and started focusing everything I had on my wrists. I have never fought harder to do anything in my entire life. I was fully convinced that in a few minutes I would be dead if I didn't get this done right at this moment. Somehow I was able to get the shackles off my wrists while skinning them in the process. I had blood pouring out of cuts from both my wrists and ankles, but I was free of them. I went over to the window and punched right through it, but to my utter dismay, there were bars right behind it. There was nothing I could do. I was completely trapped with no chance of escape. My captors heard the commotion and came running into the room. They grabbed me and tied me down to the bed again, and this time put 1 strap over my chest, leaving me effectively unable to wiggle or move. This was it. I was freaking done for. In the next few moments, I made peace with death for the first time in my life. A beautiful wave of peace washed through my entire body, and I laid in my bed feeling completely okay with the world. I thought about my parents and my friends, and hoped that they would at least learn of my death, and not left wondering what happened to me. I thought about my dog, and hoped that she wouldn't think I just abandoned her. I thought about quite a few things, but all with a peaceful heart. An hour, or what felt like an hour, passed and no one came. I thought for sure they would have began skinning me alive by this point, or whatever sick torture device they would have chosen for me. This was also around the time I started getting sober and that damn absinthe started leaving my mind. A few things I had previously been oblivious to started coming into focus. This place I was in wasn't as dilapidated and abandoned as I had previously thought. I could hear noises of people coming from down the hallway, and it reminded me of a public place, not a dilapidated kill house that I had convinced myself I was in. The street outside my now broken window also seemed quite alive. It was around this time that 2 of my captors decided to come into my room again, and I started realizing that they weren't going to kill me. They came into my room wearing raggedy looking lab coats, but on these coats was also name tags. The next few minutes, everything started making a little sense. They gave me a breathalyzer, cleaned up my cuts and bandaged them. Afterwards, they took me out to a waiting room with quite a few people in it, gave me my clothes back as well as a nice ticket for public intoxication and a hefty bill for my stay. A couple things I've learned from my first stay in a Prague prison/hospital. I'm never drinking absinthe ever again. I'm never watching freaked up movies that scare the crap out of me before a vacation. And that I'm pretty sure that if/when I'm in an actual life and death situation, I will have the will to fight for my survival. That was my most fricked up night ever, and the strongest instance of fear I have ever felt. Somewhere around 1990, I was about 11 and was walking with a friend when a guy grabbed me and threw me the back seat of his car. His daughter was in the front seat and they were looking for someone who had been hassling the girl at our local park, and she recognized me from the park and thought I knew the guy. I kind of did, but only by first name, and didn't know where he lived. But then I got a great idea. I said I knew where he lived and had the guy drive to where I lived. As soon as the car stopped, I jumped out. All the neighbors were out and blocked him in, so he couldn't leave before the cops showed up. He was arrested, but between being young at the time and this being nearly 30 years ago, I don't remember what happened to him. How did you let all the neighbors know what was up before the guy could simply drive away? The kid who was with me was able to run home and tell everyone what happened. My father took me on Halloween when I was 5. We ended up 3 states over. He had major warrants out and went on the run. He was a violent drunk and a tweaker. We hopped counties most of my childhood avoiding his newest warrants. He tried to kill me several times while drunk by strangling me, and I basically grew up in honky-tonk bars and him drunk driving with me in the car almost driving us off a cliff in between the bar and our house. He hurt me really bad one day and school got involved. I was given to his mother who promptly moved him in where it continued. I had to run away back to my original state to be with my mom. But by then I was super messed up by it and had to live in children's shelter and a group home. Someone tried to kidnap me when I was in 7th grade, if that counts. I was walking home from the bus stop, a little over half a mile / about 1 kilometer, on a chilly November day in suburbia when a minivan pulls up alongside me and the driver, a guy I had never seen before who looked to be in his mid-50s, rolls down his window, asking me if I wanted a ride. I said no, and he insisted, rolling his car alongside me as I continued to walk. I remember he called me little girl, which was weird to me because I had hit puberty at, like, age 9 and was always getting mistaken for a high schooler, but the Catholic school uniform might have made me look younger. IDK. He kept this up until I said, "I'm not going with you. Please leave me alone." At that point he pulled into a driveway in front of me to block me, and another guy, probably in his early 20s, opened the door and started jumping out toward me. Of course, this was before everyone had cell phones, so I couldn't call the police or anything. Just run as fast as I could away from them while screaming help, please, and hoping it would scare them off. I ended up cutting through the park on that street and zigzagging my way through backyards to get to my house. Turns out the guy was a registered sex offender who lived a few streets away from my bus stop. My dad filed a police report, but we never heard anything back about it. There were younger kids and my younger siblings who usually were there with me, so I'm not sure what would have happened if they had been there that day. Would the men still have tried to take someone, or would they have been intimidated by the group? Scary to think about what could have happened. Just a warning. Sorry about the grammar and all that, since I'm typing from mobile. Also not my story, but a family friend. So my uncle, not really related but a longtime friend of my dad, was kidnapped in Mexico City. We call his type of kidnapping an express kidnapping because they will just drive around town looking for random people to kidnap for either ransom or organ extraction. Well, he got kidnapped on a Tuesday, I believe. They held him in a room for about 3 days or so. Unlucky for him, he was kidnapped to take his organs, all of them. Well, they had a doctor there that would do a full checkup on him to make sure he was healthy. Well, lucky for him, the doctor told them that he had cancer everywhere and he was unusable. He told them he was going to die probably in couple months anyway, so there was no reason to kill him. They took him out of the city into the highway in between Mexico City and Mexico State. They literally threw him in a ditch and left him there. They told him if they ever see him again they were gonna kill him. Well, he managed to find a ride home and returned home to his family. Here's the crazy part. He heard the doctor talk about his cancer and whatnot, so he went to the hospital once he was back, and enough time had passed, so he felt safe going outside. Well, at the hospital he got a full checkup, and to his surprise he was completely healthy. No sign of cancer or anything. To this day we don't know if the doctor felt pity for him or there was a mistake on the test, but he got really lucky and he survived imminent death. We haven't seen him in a while though, because after all this, he decided to move cities and stay off the radar because of the fear of the kidnapped finding out about him. He comes to town once in 5 years or so, but even then he only stays for a couple of days. Almost got kidnapped one time. It was 2005, and around Christmas time this big van with Nevada plates came creeping through our neighborhood. I live in a cul-de-sac, and it's only about a quarter mile long with about 6 houses. My mom noticed him 3 days in a row, and decided one day to hop in her minivan and follow him. He noticed her following him, and began to speed away frantically. My mom phoned the police but nothing happened. Fast forward 5 months, it's May, and 5th grade for me was almost over. We had a half day and a substitute teacher that day. My classroom phone rang, and I was told a relative was outside to pick me up. The class did the classic oh, and I figured, because it was a half day maybe my dad wanted me to go home for something. Instead of going right outside I went to the office to see who had called and was here. The secretary was surprised to hear that someone had called my class to release me. She would have been the one to do it. She called the middle and high school, which are connected, because we are K-12 and neither of them had called me down, figuring because I had older siblings there. So the secretary whaled me back to class, and when speaking with the substitute the sub told her that it was a man's voice on the phone. Immediately the school went into lockdown. Apparently a man had gained access to our school's phone line, found my classroom, and requested me to leave the building. My parents were notified immediately, and my dad came to the school in a matter of minutes. We reviewed the security tapes, and could see a man standing outside a big van on his cell phone looking, and a sheet of paper. Somehow this man knew I had a substitute teacher, and that I could have been vulnerable that day. Later that night after a police escort home, and a weird day overall, we heard a vehicle ripping down our road. My dad rushes to the window to see a big van with Nevada plates driving through mine, and my neighbor's lawn circling, tearing up the grass, and flashing his high beams. My dad grabbed his gun and we all went into the basement, calling the cops. The man was never identified, and to this day we don't know what could have happened if I didn't stop at the school office first instead of walking out the doors. I must have been 6/7. My grandma and mum cooked up a plan to test what I would do if some stranger grabbed me. My grandma was to grab me from behind and see what I did. Why they thought this was a good idea I'll never know. The flaw was my grandma didn't tell my mum when or where she was going to do it. We were stood in Woolworths, and I felt a hand go over my mouth and someone start dragging me back. I start screaming and kicking. My mum turns around and sees me disappear around a corner with a hand over my mouth. Security were called. That took some explaining. So I was like 3, my sister was 4 and my brother was an infant. My biological father kidnapped us from Iowa and took us to New Mexico, where he left us with our grandmother, his mom, for 8 months. While we were living with my grandmother, I guess my mom would call looking for him and looking for us, and grandma would tell my mom she didn't know where he was and she didn't know where we were. She even cut me and my sister's hair off to make us look like little boys so no one would recognize us. I guess one day my biological father came to his mom's and kidnapped us again from her this time, where she called my mom and told her what was going on. Mom got on a bus and came to get us. I don't remember much because I was so little, but I remember this part. He had taken us to a homeless shelter where the police found us. They arrested him and kept us safe until our mom got there and took us back home on a bus. I didn't find out how long we had actually been gone until I was in college, like 18 years old, talking with my mom about it. From my memory the whole thing seems like just a span of days, not months. I don't know whatever happened with my biological father's arrest. I don't know what they charged him with. I don't know if my grandmother ever even got in trouble. I never talked to him, and he died when I was 16. Of course I don't associate with that side of the family at all either. Again, not a full kidnapping, but I almost did something stupid enough when I was just 21. I had pulled into a gas station late at night. I had gotten gas when a guy came up to me. This wasn't a particularly bad area. He said he was stranded and asked if I could just give him a short ride down the road to his place as it was cold. Stupidly, I agreed, but said I had to pay for my gas and stuff first. I wasn't worried. I was an invincible young adult. Plus I was legally carrying a firearm. I went in, bought my stuff, came back out, and around my car were the guy and 2 others. I stopped a few feet away. "We are ready," the first guy said. The other 2 guys weren't making eye contact. I muttered something about it was just supposed to be him. He said it was okay. While I was reasonably sure I could handle myself against one person, I knew I had just gotten myself screwed. I turned around, went back in the store, and, not having a cell on me, asked the clerk if he knew the guys, and if there were a problem, to call the police. The clerk did. I stayed in the store. The guys hung around my car for a few minutes, but a cop car pulled up shortly after. I stayed in the store, so I didn't hear what was said, but the cop pulled up next to my car and he and the guys talked for a little bit, and then they walked off. I walked back out. Cop asked if I was okay. I said yeah, and got in my car and drove off. Never went back to that station. Probably wouldn't have been a kidnapping, but was pretty sure it was about to be a robbery or carjacking. But they were waiting for me to get in the car. Thank you for watching. Subscribe and like for more future content.